The distress beacon died mid-transmission, and Captain Jake Morrison knew exactly what that meant. 1,500 colonists on Kepler Station had just stopped screaming. The viewing screen showed nothing but debris where the mining outpost used to orbit, chunks of metal spinning against the void like broken teeth. His first officer, Linda Grant, stood frozen at her console, her face drained of color. The transmission had lasted 47 seconds, long enough to hear the weapons fire, long enough to hear children crying, long enough to identify the attackers as Krell warships, their distinctive ion signatures burning bright on every scanner, not long enough to send help. Jake's knuckles turned white as he gripped the command chair. Kepler Station had been a civilian installation. No military presence, no weapons platforms, just families trying to make a living pulling rare minerals from dead asteroids. The Krell had known that. They had chosen their target carefully. This was the third human colony in 2 months. The pattern was clear now, even if the Galactic Council refused to see it. The Krell Empire was testing humanity's response, pushing boundaries, seeing how far they could go before the newcomers pushed back. Earth had only joined the galactic community 5 years ago, still considered naive children by the elder races. The communications officer, Danny Park, turned from his station with shaking hands. The Galactic Council had just sent their standard response. Diplomatic channels were open. Negotiations would begin. Both sides were urged to show restraint, the usual meaningless words that accomplished nothing while families died. Jake stood and walked to the viewport, staring at the debris field. Somewhere in that wreckage were people he knew. Commander Lisa Wells had invited him to her daughter's birthday party last month. He had declined, too busy with patrol duties. Now there would be no more birthdays. The bridge fell silent except for the steady beep of the sensors. His crew watched him, waiting. They all knew the regulations. They all knew what Earth Command would say. De-escalate. Follow proper channels, let the Council handle it. Humans were supposed to prove they were civilized, that they deserved their place among the stars. Jake made his decision in the space between heartbeats. He turned to his tactical officer, a sharp-eyed veteran named Greg Hayes. The man sat straighter in his chair, reading something in his captain's expression. Protocol demanded he wait for orders. Protocol demanded he file reports and attend meetings while bureaucrats debated appropriate responses. Protocol had let 1,500 people die while everyone followed the rules. He touched the communication panel, opening a channel to the entire fleet. 23 human warships scattered across this sector, all receiving the same useless Council transmission, all watching the same debris field, all making the same calculation. His voice cut through the silence, calm and cold as deep space. The words would change everything, would burn every bridge with the Galactic Council, would mark humanity as something the galaxy had not seen in 10,000 years. He did not care. The hunt was about to begin. Linda Grant had served with Jake Morrison for 3 years, and she had never heard that tone in his voice before. It reminded her of winter ice breaking over a frozen lake, beautiful and terrible and absolutely certain. The captain's message to the fleet was spreading now, jumping from ship to ship, igniting something that had been building in every human who heard about Kepler Station. The Krell thought they understood warfare. They had conquered 40 systems over the last century, always following the same pattern. Strikes off targets, force diplomatic concessions, claim territory through negotiation backed by implied threat. It worked because the Galactic Council prized stability above all else. Better to sacrifice one colony than risk widespread conflict. Better to let the Krell have their victories than disturb the comfortable peace. But the Krell had made one critical mistake. They had studied human history, seen the wars and conflicts, and assumed they understood what humanity would do. They had read about diplomacy and international law and peace treaties. The response from the fleet came within minutes. Every captain gave the same answer. Every crew volunteered. 23 warships changed course simultaneously, their drives burning bright as they accelerated toward Krell space. Earth Command would be receiving notifications right now, alerts screaming about unauthorized fleet movements, violations of treaty boundaries, potential acts of war. Jake ignored the incoming messages. He had disabled the recall codes before sending his transmission. Command could order him to stop all they wanted. He would be too far into Krell territory to hear them properly. Communications could be so unreliable near gas giants. Greg Hayes worked his tactical console with practiced efficiency, pulling up everything intelligence had on Krell military positions. The Empire maintained a strong perimeter defense, but their interior was surprisingly vulnerable. They had never needed heavy fortification behind the front lines. No one had ever been crazy enough to attack them directly. Danny Park intercepted a council transmission, their tone shifting from diplomatic platitudes to alarm. The council was demanding Earth explain the fleet movements. They were calling for immediate cessation of hostilities. They were threatening sanctions and expulsion from galactic trade networks. Jake nodded the threats with grim satisfaction. The council was afraid not of the Krell, but of what humanity was about to do. Linda accessed the tactical database, highlighting potential targets. Krell had 17 military installations in their core systems, facilities that had planned and launched the attacks on human colonies. They also had 3 major population centers on their homeworld and 6 colony worlds with significant civilian presence. She looked at Jake, the question unspoken. Rules of engagement. Would they become the same monsters they were hunting? Would they strike civilians the way Kepler Station had been struck? Jake's answer was immediate and firm. Military targets only. They would show the Krell exactly what humanity was capable of, but they would not cross that line. They would not kill children. They would not prove the Council right about humanity's savage nature. They would be surgical, precise, and absolutely merciless within those boundaries. The fleet dropped into formation, 23 ships moving as one organism. Human warships were newer designs built with 5 years of galactic technology but engineered with human innovation. They were faster than Krell battlecruisers, more maneuverable than Council peacekeepers, and equipped with weapon systems that made alien engineers nervous. Earth's military had spent those 5 years preparing for a war nobody thought would come. They had studied every conflict in galactic history, identified patterns and weaknesses, and built a fleet designed to fight enemies with 10,000 years more experience. The admirals had been called paranoid. The defense budget had been questioned. Now that preparation would be tested, the first Krell patrol appeared on sensors, 3 light cruisers guarding the outer boundary of their territory. They sent the standard challenge, demanding identification and purpose. Greg Hayes did not bother responding. His fingers danced across the weapons console, target locks acquiring faster than Krell sensors could detect them. The human fleet opened fire at maximum range, railguns accelerating tungsten penetrators to fractional light speed. The physics were simple, brutal, and effective. Kinetic energy did not care about shields designed to deflect energy weapons. The Krell cruisers shattered like glass, their hulls never designed to withstand the primitive but devastating weapons humanity had brought to the stars. Debris scattered across 3,000 kilometers of space. The fleet did not slow down, did not stop to confirm kills, did not waste time on targets that were already dead. They burned deeper into Krell space, their drives leaving trails of ionized particles that would be visible to every sensor in the sector. The Council was sending frantic transmissions now begging humanity to reconsider, warning of consequences, promising investigations into Kepler Station. Jake listened to 3 seconds of the first message before cutting the channel. Words meant nothing now. The time for talking had ended 47 seconds into that distress call when the screaming stopped. Linda monitored incoming intelligence, watching the Krell fleet scramble to respond. They were pulling ships from garrison duties, recalling patrols, forming defensive positions around their primary military installation on the 4th planet of their home system. Standard doctrine, textbook response to an invasion. They were preparing to fight the kind of war they understood. They were about to learn that humans fought differently. Jake pulled up the tactical overlay, studying the Krell positions with cold calculation. He had read every report on Krell tactics, studied every battle they had ever fought. They relied on numerical superiority and defensive firepower, sitting behind fortifications and wearing down attackers. They expected enemies to exhaust themselves against prepared positions. The human fleet did not slow down as they approached the Krell defense line. Instead, they accelerated, their drives pushing past safety margins, redlining systems that engineers said should not be pushed that hard. Krell weapons opened fire at extreme range, energy beams and plasma torpedoes filling space with deadly light. Human point defense came alive, rapid-fire cannons tracking and destroying incoming projectiles with computer precision. Shields flickered and held, absorbing damage that would have crippled older vessels. The fleet formation shifted, ships weaving through the defensive fire in patterns too complex for Krell-targeting computers to predict. And then they were through the perimeter inside the defensive envelope where Krell doctrine said attackers should be trapped and destroyed. Instead, the human ships scattered into attack groups, each team targeting a specific installation with practiced efficiency. This was not exploration, this was not peacekeeping. This was what humanity had spent 10,000 years learning how to do better than anyone else. This was war, and the Krell were about to understand why the galaxy should have been more careful about which species they pushed. The Krell Command Center on Drakon 4 had stood for 300 years, a monument to military efficiency and imperial power. Admiral Kresh stood in the central command pit, watching his tactical displays with growing disbelief. The humans were not following any known attack pattern. They were not behaving like any enemy the Krell had ever faced. 6 human destroyers broke from the main fleet, burning toward the orbital defense platforms at speeds that should have torn their ships apart. Krell gunners locked on, firing solution after solution, but the human vessels danced through the barrage like fighters instead of capital ships. Their acceleration curves were impossible, their maneuvers defying the physics that governed every other species in the galaxy. One of his officers reported engine readings that made no sense. The humans were running their reactors at 200% of rated capacity, burning fuel at rates that should leave them dead in space within hours. But they were not planning to fight for hours. They were planning to end this quickly, throwing everything into a single, overwhelming assault that would either destroy the Krell defenses or leave the human fleet crippled. It was insane. It was reckless. It was working. The first orbital platform died when a human destroyer flew within point-blank range, ignoring the defensive batteries to deliver a full spread of missiles directly into the station's reactor core. The explosion lit up the planet's night side, a miniature sun that vaporized the platform and everything within 50 kilometers. The destroyer emerged from the fireball, trailing atmosphere and debris, its armor scorched but intact. Kresh ordered his fleet to engage, sending 40 warships against the 23 human vessels. Krell ships were larger, more heavily armed, crewed by veterans of a dozen campaigns. But the humans fought with a ferocity that turned numerical advantage meaningless. A human cruiser designated Hunter 7 took fire from 3 Krell battlecruisers simultaneously. Its shields collapsed under the assault, armor blackening and melting as energy beams carved through the hull. Any sane commander would have withdrawn, called for support, tried to preserve their ship. The human captain did the opposite. Hunter 7 rotated on its axis, bringing all weapons to bear on the nearest Krell battlecruiser, even as its own hull breached in a dozen places. Railguns fired in continuous streams, punching through Krell armor like paper. Missile batteries launched their entire payload in a single salvo, hundreds of warheads tracking on plasma trails. The Krell battlecruiser tried to evade, but at this range, evasion was impossible. Both ships died together, locked in a mutual kill that left wreckage spinning through space. But Hunter 7 had traded 1 damaged cruiser for a battlecruiser worth 10 times as much. The math was brutal, and the humans seemed perfectly willing to accept it. Kresh watched 2 more of his battlecruisers die to similar tactics. The humans were not trying to win a clean victory. They were trading ships for maximum damage, accepting casualties that would be unthinkable to any Krell commander. Every human vessel fought like it was already dead, crews pushing their ships beyond any reasonable limit. The second wave of human ships hit the military research facility on Drakon 4's southern continent. Marine dropships burned through the atmosphere despite heavy ground fire, their heat shields glowing white-hot as they descended. Krell ground forces opened fire with everything they had, filling the sky with explosions and shrapnel. The dropships did not deviate. Some were hit, tumbling out of the sky in flames, but the rest kept coming. They crashed through the facility's defensive perimeter, and human Marines poured out before the ships had fully stopped. The fighting was close and vicious, room to room, corridor to corridor. The humans fought with an aggression that shocked Krell defenders who had spent careers studying warfare. Colonel Harris led the assault personally, his powered armor absorbing hits that would have killed an unprotected soldier. His team moved through the facility with practiced efficiency, setting demolition charges on every piece of equipment that could not be captured. They were not there to hold territory. They were there to destroy the Krell's ability to make war. The research facility had designed the weapons used at Kepler Station. The scientists working there had calculated blast patterns to maximize civilian casualties, had run simulations on how to cause the most terror with minimum ammunition expenditure. Harris found their reports in a secure database, documentation of 3 attacks on human colonies, recommendations for future strikes. He uploaded everything to the fleet, raw evidence of premeditated murder. Then he armed the final demolition charge and led his team back to the dropships. The facility disappeared in a series of explosions that could be seen from orbit. 300 years of military research turned to ash and rubble. Jake Morrison watched the tactical display from his command chair, tracking each human ship, monitoring casualty reports that climbed with every passing minute. They had lost 4 vessels already, hundreds of crew members who would not be going home. The cost was high, higher than any engagement in recent human history. But Kepler Station had cost 1,500 lives, and the Krell had been planning more attacks targeting colonies across human space, testing to see if Earth would respond or if humanity would accept its place as victims in the galactic order. The answer burned across Krell space in letters written in fire and wreckage. Humanity would not accept it. Humanity would not negotiate. Humanity would not forgive. The main Krell fleet finally arrived, 90 warships dropping out of faster-than-light travel in a coordinated emergence that demonstrated decades of tactical experience. They formed a battle wall, overlapping fields of fire designed to crush any force caught between them. It was the classic Krell response to overwhelming odds, a formation that had broken enemy fleets for generations. Jake smiled without humor. The Krell still thought they were fighting a conventional war. They still believed that humanity would follow the rules, would respect the established patterns of galactic warfare. They were about to learn their final lesson. He opened a channel to the entire human fleet, his voice calm despite the chaos surrounding them. The orders were simple, direct, and would cement humanity's reputation for the next 1,000 years. Every captain acknowledged their responses coming in fast and certain. The human fleet did not retreat. They did not try to break through the Krell formation. Instead, they charged directly into the center of the battle wall, every ship firing at maximum rate, every weapon system burning hot. It was suicide by any rational calculation, a berserker charge that should have resulted in total annihilation. But humans had been making suicide charges work for their entire violent history. They had refined the tactic across countless battlefields, learned exactly how to turn desperation into victory, how to make the enemy pay for every meter of space. The Krell were about to receive an education in human warfare that their survivors would never forget. The battle wall should have been impenetrable. 90 Krell warships, their shields overlapping in a defensive matrix that had stopped fleets twice the size of the human force. Krell tactical doctrine was built on this formation, a wall of steel and energy that ground down attackers through sheer firepower and endurance. Admiral Kresh watched his displays with grim satisfaction as the human ships accelerated toward certain death. Then the humans did something no Krell commander had ever witnessed. Instead of distributing their fire across multiple targets, all 23 remaining ships focused on a single point in the formation. Every railgun, every missile battery, every energy weapon concentrated on 3 Krell battlecruisers in the center of the wall. The targeted ships vanished under a wave of kinetic and explosive force that overwhelmed their defenses in seconds. Their shields collapsed, their armor vaporized, their reactors went critical simultaneously. The triple explosion tore a hole in the battle wall, 30 kilometers wide. The human fleet poured through the gap before it could close, their formation splitting into attack groups that scattered through the Krell ranks like sharks among smaller fish. The advantage of the battle wall disappeared instantly. At close range, with enemy ships intermixed with friendly forces, the Krell could not fire without risking hits on their own vessels, but the humans had no such concerns. Their point defense systems tracked every incoming shot with computer precision. Their formation kept them clear of each other by meters, and they fired with absolute confidence that every shot would hit enemy armor. They had trained for exactly this scenario, practiced the maneuver in simulation after simulation until it became instinct. Linda Grant coordinated the tactical data, feeding targeting information to every ship in the fleet. Human vessels fought as a networked organism, each captain seeing what all the others saw, responding to threats before they fully developed. It was a level of coordination the Krell had never achieved, could not achieve with their command structure built on hierarchy and individual ship authority. A Krell dreadnought, the pride of their fleet and personal command ship of Admiral Kresh, found itself bracketed by 4 human destroyers. The massive vessel outweighed all 4 combined, carried enough firepower to level a continent, and had armor thick enough to withstand sustained bombardment. It should have swatted the smaller ships aside like insects. The destroyers attacked from 4 different vectors simultaneously, never staying in the dreadnought's firing arc for more than seconds at a time. They were too fast, too maneuverable, their captains anticipating the massive ship's movements and staying just ahead of its targeting solutions. Railgun rounds hammered the dreadnought's shields from multiple angles, degrading them through sustained fire rather than trying to punch through with single shots. Kresh ordered evasive maneuvers, but a dreadnought could not dodge like a fighter. His ship was built to sit in battle lines and trade shots with enemy capital ships, not to dance with vessels a tenth its size. The shields finally failed on the port quarter, and the destroyers concentrated their fire on the breach. Tungsten penetrators punched through armor plating, each impact creating shockwaves that rattled through the massive hull. Damage reports flooded in from a dozen sections. The dreadnought was wounded, bleeding, atmosphere, and crew, but still fighting. Kresh prepared to sell his ship dearly. Then one of the human destroyers did something that would be analyzed in military academies for the next century. Captain Rodriguez of the Valiant calculated a trajectory that every tactical computer said was impossible, plotted a course that required timing measured in microseconds, and executed a maneuver that his crew later swore defied physics. The Valiant accelerated directly toward the dreadnought's exposed flank, running its engines past every safety limit. Point defense fire filled space around the small ship, and for a moment it seemed certain the destroyer would be torn apart before reaching its target. But Rodriguez had timed it perfectly, had calculated exactly where every defensive battery would be firing. The Valiant threaded through the defensive fire, rolled 90 degrees on its axis, and fired every weapon it had directly into the dreadnought's exposed reactor core. Then Rodriguez pulled the hardest turn his ship was capable of, feeling his crew black out from the G-forces despite their crash harnesses and inertial dampeners. The dreadnought's reactor went critical. The explosion started deep in the ship's core and blossomed outward, tearing through deck after deck until the entire vessel came apart in a ball of superheated plasma. The shockwave caught the Valiant, slamming the destroyer end over end, but the small ship's armor held. Rodriguez fought for control, his vision tunneling from the acceleration, and managed to stabilize before the ship tumbled into a Krell cruiser. The loss of the dreadnought broke something in the Krell fleet. Their admiral was dead, their flagship destroyed, and these human newcomers were fighting with a savagery that defied every assumption about how civilized species conducted warfare. Krell captains began to make independent decisions, some trying to maintain formation, others breaking away to engage individual human ships. The unity that made the battle wall effective shattered. And once the formation broke, the fight became a series of individual engagements where human speed and aggression held every advantage. Jake Morrison watched the Krell fleet fragment on his tactical display, saw the moment when military discipline gave way to survival instinct. He gave the order he had been holding in reserve. Every human ship activated their experimental faster-than-light inhibitor, a piece of technology that Earth's engineers had developed in secret that the Galactic Council did not know existed. The field generators spun up, creating a bubble of distorted space that made FTL travel impossible within a light-second radius. The Krell could not retreat. They could not escape. They had to stand and fight against an enemy that seemed to welcome death as long as they could take Krell ships with them. It was a nightmare scenario, the kind of trap that Krell tactical manual said could never happen because no species was crazy enough to build their entire strategy around it. But humans had built their entire military history around impossible victories won through calculated desperation. They had turned losing battles into legendary stands so many times that it had become part of their cultural identity. The Krell had studied human diplomacy and assumed that was what humanity represented. They should have studied human warfare instead. The battle raged for another 40 minutes, human ships trading damage with Krell vessels in exchanges that left both sides bleeding. The humans lost 6 more ships, their crews fighting to the last before their vessels broke apart. But for every human ship destroyed, 3 Krell vessels died. The math was brutal and unsustainable for the Krell fleet. When the FTL inhibitors finally powered down, only 31 Krell ships remained out of the 90 that had arrived. They jumped to faster than light immediately, abandoning the system without trying to recover survivors or salvage. It was the first time in 300 years that a Krell fleet had retreated from any battlefield. Jake Morrison sat in his command chair, surrounded by damage reports and casualty lists. 10 human ships destroyed. Over 4,000 crew members dead. His fleet was battered, running on emergency power, held together by emergency repairs and determination. By any objective measure, it was a devastating loss. But the Krell had lost 59 warships, including their flagship and supreme commander. Their primary military installation was rubble. Their research facility was ash. And every species in the galaxy now knew that humanity would not accept attacks on civilian targets without response. The Galactic Council was sending urgent messages demanding Jake's immediate surrender, calling the attack an act of terrorism and mass murder. Earth Command was more divided, some admirals calling for courts-martial, others quietly congratulating him on a brilliant tactical victory. Public opinion on Earth was solidly behind the fleet, citizens demanding their government support the crews who had avenged Kepler Station. Jake ignored all of it. He opened a single communication channel, broadcasting on all frequencies that the Krell Empire monitored. His message was brief, delivered in a tone that carried no anger, no satisfaction, just cold certainty about the future. Humanity would not negotiate with those who murdered civilians. Any attack on human colonies would be answered with total war. The galaxy could accept that or not, but the terms were non-negotiable. Earth was done being the victim, done accepting platitudes while families died, done playing by rules that protected aggressors and punished defenders. The age of humanity trying to fit into galactic civilization was over. A new age had begun. One where humans would defend their own by any means necessary. The Krell had taught them this lesson. Now the whole galaxy would learn it. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened 6 hours after the Battle of Dracon 4. Representatives from 47 species gathering in the Great Chamber on Unity Station. The ornate hall had witnessed 10,000 years of debate and diplomacy, resolutions crafted to maintain peace across hundreds of star systems. Today it witnessed something entirely different. A fundamental challenge to the order that had governed galactic civilization since before humans discovered fire. Ambassador Catherine Wells stood in the human delegation box watching the other representatives with calm composure. She had been appointed to this position 3 years ago, chosen for her diplomatic skills and ability to navigate complex political situations. Those skills were about to be tested beyond anything her training had prepared her for. The council's speaker, a Valorian named Tress, who had held the position for 60 years, called the session to order. His voice carried the weight of authority earned through decades of negotiation and compromise. He began with the standard protocols, but everyone in the chamber knew this was not a standard session. The Krell representative, Subcommander Draith, spoke first. His species had never allowed their military defeats to show in political forums, and today was no exception. He described the human attack in terms designed to inflame the Council, painting Earth's fleet as rogue elements acting without authorization, violating every treaty and norm that bound civilized species together. Catherine listened without expression as Draith detailed the casualties, the destruction of military facilities, the unprovoked assault on Krell's sovereign territory. He carefully avoided mentioning Kepler Station did not reference the 3 human colonies that had been attacked in the preceding months. His narrative painted humanity as aggressors, newcomers who had barely joined the galactic community before showing their true savage nature. Other representatives joined in, species who had economic ties to the Krell Empire or who feared that human aggression might encourage other young races to solve their problems through violence rather than negotiation. The criticisms built like a wave, calls for sanctions against Earth, demands for the surrender of fleet personnel to face trial, suggestions that humanity should be expelled from the Council entirely. Catherine waited until the chamber fell silent, until every species had their chance to condemn Earth's actions. Then she walked to the central podium, her footsteps echoing in the vast hall. She carried a data tablet, but she did not look at it. The information it contained was burned into her memory, statistics and images that would shape everything that followed. She began by thanking the Council for their time, maintaining the diplomatic courtesies even as she prepared to burn down every assumption they held. Then she activated the holographic display, filling the chamber with an image that made several representatives turn away. Kepler Station before the attack. 1,500 faces, families, and workers, the kind of civilian installation that every species claimed to protect under galactic law, the kind of target that was supposed to be off-limits even in legitimate military conflicts. Catherine let the image stand for 10 seconds, long enough for everyone to see the children playing in the station's observation dome. Miners heading to their shifts, ordinary people living ordinary lives. Then she showed what the Krell had done to them. The hologram shifted to wreckage and bodies, debris fields that had once been homes and schools and shops. The images spoke clearly enough. She showed all 47 seconds of the distress transmission. Let the Council hear the weapons fire and the screaming. Let them witness what civilized negotiation had accomplished. The chamber remained silent. Several representatives looked uncomfortable, but Draith maintained his composure. Catherine knew what he would argue, that the attack on Kepler Station was a rogue operation, that the Krell Empire had not authorized civilian casualties, that proper channels existed to address such concerns. She cut him off before he could speak, her voice sharp enough to silence the protest forming on his lips. She displayed the evidence that Colonel Harris had recovered from the Krell research facility, planning documents for all 3 attacks on human colonies, detailed analysis of civilian casualty patterns, recommendations for future strikes calculated to cause maximum terror, official military documentation bearing the seals of the Krell High Command. The Krell had not just attacked human civilians, they had planned it, studied it, refined their approach to make it more effective. They had turned the murder of families into a tactical science, and they had done it while maintaining diplomatic relations with Earth, while smiling in council chambers and promising peaceful coexistence. Catherine presented the evidence methodically, building a case that would have taken months in any human court. She showed how the Krell had tested humanity's response, how they had calculated that Earth would follow proper channels rather than retaliate directly, how they had planned 3 more attacks on human colonies targeting stations with high civilian populations and minimal defensive capability. The council speaker called for a recess, his ancient face pale with the implications of what Catherine had revealed. But she was not finished. She refused the recess, her voice carrying across the chamber with authority that surprised even herself. She had one more point to make, and the council would hear it before they retreated to private discussions. Earth had followed proper channels after the first attack. They had filed complaints, presented evidence, requested council intervention. They had been told to be patient, to trust the diplomatic process, to give negotiation time to work. While they waited, 600 more civilians died in the second attack. While they continued to wait, Kepler Station was destroyed. The proper channels had failed. The diplomatic process had failed. The Council's promise of protection had failed. 1,500 people were dead because humanity had trusted the system to work, had believed that civilized species would not tolerate attacks on civilian populations. Catherine's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, forcing every representative to lean forward to hear. She asked a simple question that carried the weight of human history behind it. What was Earth supposed to do? What response was appropriate when diplomacy had failed, when negotiation had accomplished nothing, when following the rules had only resulted in more dead families? The silence stretched for long moments. Finally, the Centauri Prime representative, an elder statesman named Velen, who had helped draft the current council charter, spoke carefully. He acknowledged that the Krell actions were reprehensible, that the evidence Catherine presented was deeply troubling, but he argued that humanity's response was disproportionate, that military action of this scale threatened the stability that had kept the galaxy peaceful for millennia. Catherine smiled without humor. She had expected this argument, had prepared for exactly this response. She pulled up galactic law, the treaties and agreements that supposedly governed all council species. She read specific clauses about the right to self-defense, about proportional response to military threats, about the obligations of council members to protect civilian populations. Then she showed how the Krell had violated every single one of those laws, and she showed how the Council had done nothing about it, had allowed 3 attacks to occur without meaningful response, had prioritized stability over justice. She demonstrated that by the Council's own laws, Earth's response was not only justified but required. The legal argument was airtight, documented and cross-referenced with precision that human lawyers had spent weeks preparing. Several council members nodded slowly, recognizing the trap they had walked into. By their own standards, by the rules they had created, humanity had acted appropriately. Earth had waited for the system to work, had given diplomacy every chance to succeed, and had only resorted to military action when all other options were exhausted. But Catherine knew the real argument was not about law. It was about power and precedent, about what message the Council's response would send to every other species in the galaxy. She shifted her presentation to address this directly, her words chosen to cut through the comfortable assumptions that had governed galactic politics for 10,000 years. Earth did not want war. Humanity had no territorial ambitions in Krell space, no desire to conquer or subjugate other species, but they would not accept attacks on civilians, would not negotiate with those who made war on families, would not trust a system that had failed so completely to protect the innocent. The Council had a choice. They could condemn humanity, attempt to enforce sanctions, try to make Earth an example of what happened when young species stepped out of line. Catherine outlined exactly what that would accomplish. Earth would withdraw from the Council, would pursue independent relationships with species who valued honest dealing, would defend their interests without regard for galactic opinion. Or the Council could acknowledge that their system had failed, that allowing the Krell attacks to go unpunished had created this situation, that humanity had responded to a genuine threat in the only way that proved effective. They could reform their processes, create actual consequences for species who targeted civilians, prove that the Council existed for more than maintaining comfortable illusions of peace. Catherine finished her presentation and returned to the human delegation box. The chamber erupted in debate, species arguing from every position, old alliances strained by the implications of the decision they faced. She watched with calm satisfaction as the careful order of the Council dissolved into genuine disagreement. Earth had forced the issue. The galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. Whether that would lead to cooperation or conflict remained to be seen. But humans had made their position absolutely clear. They would defend their own, and they would not apologize for it. 3 days later, the Council reached a decision. It was not the unanimous condemnation the Krell had expected, nor was it the full vindication that some on Earth had hoped for. It was something more complex, a recognition that the old order had failed and new rules needed to be written. The Krell Empire was censured for their attacks on civilian populations, their council privileges suspended pending a full investigation. Economic sanctions were imposed, trade routes restricted, diplomatic missions recalled. It was not the total isolation the Krell deserved, but it was more than the Council had ever done to any major power in living memory. Earth's military action was acknowledged as a response to legitimate provocation, though the Council carefully avoided calling it justified. Jake Morrison and his fleet would not face charges, but the Council made clear that future incidents would need to follow established protocols. It was a warning disguised as acceptance, a reminder that humanity remained the newcomer despite their military success. Catherine read the final resolution with mixed feelings. It was a political compromise, the kind of half measure that satisfied nobody completely. But it established precedent, created space for humanity to defend itself without seeking Council permission first, and it put every species in the galaxy on notice that humans would not be passive victims. Back on Earth, the debate raged through every level of government and society. Some called Jake Morrison a hero, others labeled him a war criminal. Military strategists analyzed the battle, politicians argued about the diplomatic consequences, ethicists questioned whether humanity had compromised its values by responding with such violence. Jake himself retired from active service, the weight of 4,000 casualties too heavy to carry into future conflicts. He spent his remaining years teaching at the Naval Academy, training the next generation of officers,